So we'll have a few minutes of remarks off the top, and then we'll go to a question and answer session. And thanks everybody for joining us. I have a few folks that are on the phone as well, and I'll be taking a couple of questions from them, and I'll help you guys with that. So I'd like to introduce the manager of the DOE Richland Operations Office, Doug Shoup, and Alex Smith with the Washington State Department of Ecology's Nuclear Program Office. So we'll get started. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. I'm going to go through a few slides here to help give you reference to what I'm going to be talking about today. So we will be talking about the PUREX Tunnels 1 and 2 and the structural evaluation that the Department of Energy has recently completed. And we will be transmitting to the Department of Ecology later on today. And so we wanted you to be aware of the outcome of those briefings. So to orient you on where we're at on the Hanford site, so the PUREX facility and the associated tunnels are at the center of the site in this area here. Remember, the site's 586 square miles, and so we're talking about at the very center of the site. In fact, this shows you where the PUREX facility is in the what's referred to as the inner area of the Hanford site. So this shows the PUREX facility right here. The PUREX facility was used for many years to help dissolve fuel rods and then ultimately produce plutonium. It also was used to recover uranium for additional fuel rods. Here is this tunnel 1 of the PUREX tunnels, and then here is this tunnel 2 of the tunnels themselves. So first we'll talk about tunnel number 1. So tunnel 1 was constructed in 1956 and it operated until 1965. It was constructed of large Douglas fir timbers, and it's approximately 360 feet long. The timbers themselves were coated of creosote, and the creosote was a standard process that was used then and even now to preserve the wood, to prevent rot of the wood and so forth. After the tunnel was constructed, 8 feet of soil was put on the top of the tunnels and on the sides of the tunnels. And then equipment that was no longer needed or was not functional anymore from the PUREX facility itself was put on large flatbed railroad cars, and then the materials were remotely transported down the length of the tunnels. So tunnel number 1 has 8 rail cars full of that contain materials on them. And after it ceased operations in 1965, the doors to the tunnel were closed, and nobody has gone into the tunnels for over 60 years. And that's because of the radiological hazards associated with it. So when I refer to these large pieces of equipment that are in the tunnels, this is a good example of a tank. This is the type of things that we would find in the tunnel. You can see a gentleman down here at the bottom, so it gives you a reference of how big these tunnels are. So here's an artist rendition of what the tunnels would look like. Here was the entrance of the tunnel. Here's the far end of the tunnels. You can see the types of equipment that was in the tunnels. As you can see, most of these are large vessels, and inside the vessels would be the radiological materials. So they tried to drain out these vessels of all the materials as best they could. There's in all likelihood some residual contamination that's inside these vessels. You also see some boxes, so equipment was put inside these boxes and then the boxes were closed. That's important to note because if we were to have a collapse of the tunnel, then this serves as a secondary containment for the materials that are in the tunnel. So you actually have another level of protection there. So on May 9th, there was a partial collapse of tunnel number 1. It was about 20 feet by 20 feet, and that's what's depicted here. Shortly thereafter, the hole of tunnel number 1 was filled with sand and dirt, and therefore plugging the hole back up. I need to applaud the workers who did that work. They did it very safely, and they did it in a very timely manner, and we very much appreciate their efforts. So after the hole was filled, one of the things the Department of Energy did is we put a large protective ground cover over the entire length of the 360-foot tunnel. The purpose of that cover is to actually protect the tunnel from additional rains or moisture that could put more stress on the tunnel. Again, the workers did this work flawlessly and in a very timely manner. If you're from the Tri-Cities and you were here on Tuesday of this week, you noticed that we had a very large storm come through here. So we had heavy rains with flash flooding. We had lightning and numerous lightning strikes on the site. And we had high winds that actually uprooted trees throughout the Tri-Cities. So you probably all noticed that. And I would like to tell you that our tunnel number 1 and our tunnel number 2 had no negative impacts from that very large storm that came through here. So I think that is a good indicator that it still has structural integrity. But having said that, we know that it had a collapse, and so our plan with the Department of Ecology is to fill the tunnel number 1 with engineered grout or cement. And so we are in the process of doing the engineering and planning for that and getting the site prepped to begin that work. And we anticipate that work will be done by the end of this calendar year. I should also note that when we had the collapse of a portion of tunnel number 1 on May 9th, we did extensive environmental monitoring around where that event occurred and throughout the site. And all of the monitoring we did, the federal government did, and our contractor did, indicated there was no airborne radiological release. That was substantiated by independent sampling done by the State of Washington Department of Health. So why don't we go ahead and transition to Tunnel 2. So Tunnel 2 was constructed in 1964 and it operated until 1996. So construction was approximately 50 years ago. This tunnel is about 1,700 feet long, so about 4.5 feet longer than tunnel number 1. It was made out of corrugated steel or metal that was fashioned in a semicircle, somewhat of analogous to what a Quonset hut would look like. And after it was constructed, then backfill soil was put on it to fill the outside of the tunnel up to 8 feet. In doing so, in placing the soil there many years ago, there was 2 events where that particular tunnel collapsed. And so they stopped in each of those cases and looked at their engineering and how they were doing the backfilling and made adjustments. So with regard to the engineering, they concluded they needed to put some cement girders on the outside and large steel beams and support structures on the inside and bolt those together to provide additional support for the tunnel. As far as backfilling, they changed their protocol so that there was not uneven filling of the cover over the top of it. Because if you filled it in an uneven fashion, it was putting stress on different portions of the tunnel. So after the tunnel was constructed and then retrofitted, it was filled with 28 railroad cars, similar to what tunnel number 1 had. The capacity of tunnel number 2 is 40. They use 28 capacity. So about 3/4 of it is filled. I guess I'll also mention that the equipment that is in this tunnel is largely the same type of equipment that is in tunnel number 1. There is some other equipment that came from the 300 area of the Hanford site that is also in here. But the primary materials are from the PUREX facility itself. So no one has entered this tunnel in approximately 50 years. So once it was filled, it was shut again in 1996. And so no one has entered it, and nobody has been able to look at the outside, because you can imagine an 8-foot cover over this. And this is just giving you a better idea of what it looked like after it was retrofitted with the concrete and then backfilled. You can see I'm using a clamshell here to backfill, and then a gentleman up here surveilling it as it was being backfilled. That is one of the things that we are looking at is as they did that backfill, what kinds of soils they used, how much compaction did they do. And those are all important things in an engineering evaluation. And the records, as you might imagine, 50 years ago might not have been as good as we'd like them, so we don't really have that much information about those soils and the compaction. So that level brings a level of uncertainty to us, and so we've compensated for that with conservatism in our engineering evaluation. So with regard to the engineering evaluation, again, we will be providing that to the Washington Department of Ecology today. The engineering evaluation for Tunnel 2 concluded that Tunnel 2 has been in service for over 50 years, which exceeds its design life of a facility like this. It further concludes that the risk of a future collapse of Tunnel 2 is considered high, based on the stresses on several of the structural components of the facility. And when I say stress, that could mean load, and also some of the original construction methodologies that I described previously. One of the things that has certainly complicated the engineering evaluation is as I alluded to, the engineers are not able to go inside the tunnel for obvious reasons to inspect the components, nor can they see the exterior components. The engineering evaluation did indicate that Tunnel 2 should be stabilized as soon as possible, and that's exactly what we will be doing is we will be working with the Department of Ecology to deliver a report to them by August 1st that describes various options for stabilizing and continuing to ensure the safe storage of the waste in Tunnel number 2. In doing so, we anticipate in the July timeframe we'll have a public forum or workshop by which we will talk with the public and get ideas that they might have about the ultimate disposition of or how we might best will stabilize the tunnels. And we also may get some information from former workers that we don't have in the records and so forth. So we're looking forward to that July forum or workshop. So as far as where we're at today, we have significantly increased the monitoring of both tunnels number 1 and 2. We have daily surveillances or walk downs of the tunnels to assess their structural integrity and any change in radiological conditions. As of today, there has been no changes, but we'll continue to do those daily surveillances. We've also installed cameras so we can see both tunnel number 1 and tunnel number 2. The cameras can be used remotely, so people in a shift office or at home can view the tunnels. We also are looking at perhaps additional monitoring in the future using different kinds of technologies that we can continually observe the tunnels and ensure that they continue to be stable. And we are also looking at the possibility of bringing in remote technology where we could actually get an idea of what's the general condition inside the tunnel. So that would be using a camera remotely or something like that to get a better idea of the general condition of the tunnel. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alex.
Okay, thanks to everybody for coming today. Thought I'd give you a sort of big picture idea of regulatorily where the PUREX tunnels fit in things. The PUREX tunnels are part of the site-wide RCRA permit, the dangerous waste permit for the entire Hanford site, because they are units that are storing dangerous waste, and so they're part of the permit that dictates things like you need to maintain the structural integrity of those storage containers, you need to inspect them regularly, and all those sorts of things. So they're part of the permit. When the partial collapse happened of tunnel number 1, we went back and issued an order within 24 hours that referenced the permit, particularly the provisions about maintaining the structural integrity of these waste storage containers that are, very large waste storage containers. And it had 3 things in it. The first was to try to figure out what caused the collapse in tunnel number 1. Looking also at the structural integrity of both tunnels 1 and 2. And we in particular wanted to know about the structural integrity of tunnel number 2 because it had never been assessed to our knowledge. And then the second piece of the order was by August 1st, a plan for stabilizing both tunnels and the waste in the tunnels to make sure they stay safe until a final cleanup plan can be developed. And then the third piece has to do with the RCRA permit, and it's primarily giving us a permit modification request to encompass all the short-term steps that are going to be taken to stabilize the waste in the tunnels. And then that would be incorporated into the permit, and it would accurately reflect the current status of those tunnels and the waste in them. So today is the due date for that first deliverable, and it's primarily looking at the structural integrity. They also attempted to assess the cause of the tunnel collapse, and we haven't seen the report yet. We're going to get that, but we've been briefed on it, and I think the cause is indeterminate. It's hard to figure out exactly what may have caused it, and based on what they can do in terms of looking at the tunnel, it's just hard to tell, and there's a lot of different stressors and potential reasons for that collapse. For tunnel number 2, I think we were not surprised to find that it is also at risk of collapse, but it's very concerning to us. And so that August deliverable is one the state is going to be looking forward to, because that will have proposals for what do we do about tunnel number 2? How do we also stabilize that tunnel, its structure, as well as the waste inside the tunnel? So I think that's it. The only other thing I think from the state's perspective is these issues highlight the importance of having adequate funding for the site, and we'll be talking to our members of Congress about that, as we always do. But all of these materials, structures that are holding on to waste out there at the site are starting to get older, and they're all getting past their useful life, and we want to make sure that we don't have incidents like this, or we can do what we can to prevent them. So I think that's it for me.
So with that, I think we're happy to take some questions if you might have them, and I think Jeff, you're going to. Would you help moderate?
Number 2, how do we also stabilize that tunnel and structure as well as the waste inside the tunnel? That's it. The only other thing I think from the state's perspective is these issues.
Let's go to a question in the room, please.
Okay.
I have conflicting information from different agencies on what the TPA deadlines are for final disposition of the waste in these tunnels and the tunnels. Can you cover that one more time, and we'll call that the real information?
Okay. apologize, this is off the top of my head, but I believe there is a milestone that talks about finishing cleanup of the Central Plateau as a whole, and that is 2042 or 2035?
I believe that's
2042. And then there is a 2035 date. When is the 2035 date?
so.
Shoot.
Instead of trying to address it here,
Yeah.
I think we'd be best to go ahead and get you the
We'll get that
official
to you.
documents from the tri-party agreement that
Yeah.
lays it out very clearly.
Okay. Can I get another question then,
Yeah.
since I didn't get an answer?
Why not immediately cover Tunnel 2 with plastic as you did the first one? Since that was quickly done, easily done, would prevent another big take cover if there was something unexpected.
Yep. We are looking at that possibility. Again, we owe the state by October 1, which isn't very long from now, what are all the options for stabilizing tunnel number 2. So we'll certainly take that into consideration. And remember, just as a point of fact, that tunnel number 2 is 1,700 feet long and about 4.5 times the width, or excuse me, the length of tunnel number 1. But we will consider that.
Was it very expensive to cover tunnel number 1 with plastic, you know?
Not relatively speaking, no. We can get you a number. I don't have it off the top of my head. Okay. Next question, please. Yes.
I have one clarifying and one actual question. So clarifying, when you say daily walk downs, do you mean on weekends, holidays, every day of the year that you're walking that down?
Yes, 7 days a week.
Okay.
Yes,
And then
every day.
my actual question is, I've had a lot of questions from the readers and listeners that I report to, and they are asking, what is the Department of Ecology and DOE doing to ensure that other sites across the site are being looked at a rapid pace to understand where we are with all of this infrastructure that's aging and all of these aging buildings?
I'll address it first, and then if Alex wants to add to it, obviously she will. As Alex indicated, most of the facility is at least 50 years old. The Hanford site is at least 50 years old, and so we continually are assessing the risk of different facilities on the site and prioritizing those in our cleanup, and we do that with the Environmental Protection Agency and the state. Most recently, what we've done with our contractor, CHPRC, is we've taken a very close look at all of the infrastructure, and we have a listing of several things that we believe are high priority and that we'll be working with the state and EPA on as far as their cleanup schedule.
Can you list those?
We can after we've talked to the Environmental Protection Agency and the state. I think we owe it to them to discuss that with them first. But we will be open and transparent about it, and we'll be telling people about that.
Can you talk about an increase in funding level? I mean, this takes people to go out and have engineers look at things, and is there any type of bump up in the budget on that item to kind of do that work?
CHPRC has already done the work of doing the evaluation, and then we would need to work with the tri-party agencies to come to agreement on what those priorities are, and then we will do the cleanup in accordance with those priorities and the budget allocated.
Yeah. So from the state's perspective, we're also, as soon as this tunnel collapse happened, we talked to our management team about, let's go back and look at all the various facilities that could also be at risk of something similar. So we're in the process of doing that, and we're looping, that's the word I was thinking, we're looping in our compliance team, because they have an obligation to go out to inspect various areas of the site on an annual basis and do detailed inspections to see if they're in compliance with RCRA. And so we're looping those folks in, and what we're doing is putting together a matrix of all these various areas. What's the current TPA milestone or CERCLA cleanup deadline, and do we need to reassess those along with the Department of Energy and EPA? And we're also looking at, do we need to amend our permit to require more frequent inspections, more frequent assessments of structural integrity on facilities that haven't been assessed, and things like that. So that's all in process with us right now.
Okay. Next question, please.
Just to clarify on that a little bit, when you talk about, excuse me, the inspections across the site, did this event trigger inspections in other areas, or were those already planned?
Well, we've got a pretty rigorous schedule for our compliance team, and they have different areas of the site, and it's mapped out over an annual basis. And so this didn't trigger any additional inspections, but I think our folks are going back and looking at prior inspections for facilities that have not been inspected recently to see if maybe we want to sort of, move those up in the schedule.
Make it more often or something?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll just add to that is we obviously know which facilities we have on site, and we surveil those on a very regular basis in accordance with the requirements. So it's not a lack of surveillance associated with this.
I'd like to take a question, see if anybody on the phone with us has a question. Go ahead if you have a question, please.
Got a pretty rigorous schedule for our compliance team.
Yeah, this is Dan Leone with the Exchange Monitor. I was curious relative to your fix grouting Tunnel 1. How long will that take, and what will that cost? When will you start, and who will perform that work? And do you anticipate any cost or schedule impact to other projects on the plateau? Thanks.
That was several questions. I'll try to answer them. As far as the schedule goes, the contractor, CHPRC, which is our prime contractor for the Richland Operations Office doing the cleanup on the site, is in the process now of doing the planning, engineering, and site preparations to do the grouting of tunnel number 1. We anticipate that the grout will be placed in tunnel number 1 and be completed by no later than the end of this calendar year. We do plan, once CHPRC has finalized their plans on the grouting, to tell people more about that. We'll probably have some kind of meeting to help people understand the actual process that will be used to grout the tunnels.
The contractor.
Doug, I was going to check and see on the line, and I apologize for the audio. We're about 30 seconds ahead of the web stream. But does anybody else that's on the phone line have a question?
You're interrupting. I'm sorry.
For what? We anticipate.
Okay, I'll come back to you later. Thank you.
Is this are these the only 2 waste tunnels on site, or are there some other that I'm not aware of?
So we have 5 canyons, 5 large process canyons in the Central Plateau. And these are, the PUREX tunnels are the only tunnels that are associated with the canyons. We certainly have other structures on the site, but these are the only 2 tunnels. Okay.
Going back to that
Yes.
gentleman's question about the budget, how will this fix for Tunnel 1 impact the budget?
Well, for the grouting of tunnel number 1, the Richland Operations Office is using our current funding that we have available to us to get this work done. And as I indicated, we'll have this done by the end of this calendar year. Relative to stabilizing tunnel number 2, we owe the deliverable to the state by August 1st that looks at the different options. Once we select an option, then we'll submit a budget that will accommodate that, as well as the rest of the cleanup site.
Do you have any idea how much that's going to cost?
Which one?
Both.
Well, we haven't selected number 2 yet,
Okay.
tunnel number 2, so I can't tell you what that is. For tunnel number 1, we estimate the cost, and this is a rough order of magnitude, to be about $4 to $7 million.
Just for the grouting or for everything that's been done for interim stabilization?
It would be for the grouting.
You initially said you were going to have a subcontractor do that. That's still a plan?
That will be up to our contractor, CHPRC, and how they want to contract for that or not. Any additional questions?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the phone line. Again, folks, on your end, we're about 30 seconds ahead of your webcast video. But does anybody else on the line have a question? Last chance for a question from our phone folks.
Made the cost, and this is a rough order of magnitude, to be about $4 to $7 million.
Okay.
Yes.
How close are you to that remote system to enter the tunnel and get a better look inside? I mean, I'm sure it's very difficult from just historical documents and the outside to understand what's going on inside. Are you close, or were you months off, or?
Yeah, CHPRC, our contractor, is looking at that as we speak, and so they're aggressively pursuing those types of options, and we'd be happy to tell you, obviously, once we figure that out. But there's a lot of different technology out there, and we want to put the right technology in there, and of course would be putting that into this environment that people haven't been in, and so we have to figure out not only what technology, but actually how to get it in. So I don't anticipate that it would be in the next few months. In fact, it will probably be after we deliver the product to the state, the August 2nd product to the state.
And then just one other question. A lot of people are saying, is DOE and ecology asleep at the switch? You know, are you watching this type of incident closely enough to make sure that the public is safe? And how would you answer those people that are very concerned about what's happening here at Hanford?
Well, I'll address that, and certainly Alex can if she wants to. As I alluded to earlier, we have a very good understanding of all the facilities, waste sites, and so forth on the Hanford site, and we continually assess the risk of those, and we work with the state and EPA on what's the priority for cleanup, and we also are doing routine surveillances of those. We have a workforce that goes out and evaluates those things, their stability and so forth, on a very frequent basis.
Hey, Doug, just want to let you know I need to get you to your next appointment.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and then I think Alex and I need to move on to our next engagement.
I have a question if no one else does.
So are those vessels, are they empty, those vessels? Is that just, they just have air in them, or have they been grouted, or?
So when you say vessels, Annette, I assume you're talking like those tanks?
Yes.
Yeah. So everything that I know and all of our records indicate is they got as much product out of those as possible. So I think they absolutely tried to get everything out of them.
I guess my concern is you're pouring grout over an empty vessel. Will the grout just collapse the vessel?
So this was part of the presentation that we'll give you at some point in the future when CHPRC finalizes their plans for filling the tunnels. But what we've contemplated so far is to pour the grout in lifts. So you might pour 3 feet of grout as a for instance, and you let that solidify, and then you pour more and more and more. The idea behind that is that you're actually fixing the materials to the floor so that they can't float up or anything, and also allowing the grout to flow inside of these structures and so forth. And also there would be minimal amount of weight or stress put on these vessels and boxes by filling it in a gradual fashion as I described.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for coming out today.
Okay.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Alex.
You all have a nice and safe 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.